经过长期努力，中国特色社会主义进入了新时代，这是我国发展新的历史方位。
Thank you. Wow, that was quite a clip, very eye-catching. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural session of Vision China. I'm Fu Shuning from Tsinghua University, and I will be your host for the evening. The inaugural session of Vision China is co-hosted by China Daily and the University of International Business and Economics. As you just saw in the clip, China Daily, as China's national English language newspaper, serves as a bridge between China and the world. It is now taking a fresh approach to covering China's story via a combination of print, online, and social media platforms. This event is the first in a series of events that will invite leading figures in politics, economics, academia, etc., from home and abroad to talk about China's story from a global perspective. We're looking forward to a diverse collection of ideas, deep insight, and robust debate on how the world works and what role China is playing. The goal is for the world to better understand China, and for China to better understand the world. By the way, as I speak, there are simultaneous Chinese translations being displayed on the wall to your right, courtesy of our organizer with the help of artificial intelligence. Some applause for artificial intelligence at least, please. And this evening, we are very honored to be joined by many distinguished guests. Please allow me to introduce them to you. Now, please join me in giving a big round of applause to Mr. Zhou Shuchun, publisher and editor-in-chief of China Daily, for some opening remarks. Welcome.
Mr. Guo Yimin, Vice Minister of the State Council Information Office, friends from the embassies and the press, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Vision China, the New Era Lecture Theatre. As General Secretary Xi Jinping pointed out at the party's 19th National Congress, socialism with Chinese characteristics has entered a new era. The Chinese people are embarking a new era, a long march afresh to realize the Chinese dream and pursue an even better life and brighter future. There have been discussions around the globe as to what the new era is all about, and many people have given their answers. One of the key points is that this is an era in which China will connect even more closely with the world, and more importantly, in which China will be more of an active player in the world. Today, we are launching Vision China, the New Era Lecture Theatre, in a move to embrace the new era, to pay tribute to the new era, and reveal the full implications of the new era. We are inviting world-class opinion leaders to share their ideas and interact with our readers and viewers worldwide through our global communication channels. The lecture theatre will focus on major issues facing China and the world, explore China's story, the message for the world, and how Chinese wisdom could help the world. Confucius, the ancient Chinese philosopher, said, "Gentlemen seek harmony, not uniformity." I believe the voices of opinion leaders from diversified backgrounds will blend into a glorious orchestra in this theatre. And with their knowledge, experiences, and insight, the speakers will present us with a concert of thoughts. For our first seminar, we are honored to have 3 scholars who have a profound understanding of China and the world. They are Dr. Robert Kuhn, the world-famous academic of Chinese and world studies; Andrew Moody, chief writer of China Daily's overseas editions; and Liu Xin, a presenter with China Global Television Network. As the youth rise, so will the nation. And the strength of the youth is the power of the nation, President Xi Jinping has said. As I can see now, there are many young students present here today. We hope the lectures will broaden and enhance your vision of China and the world, and thereafter, you will be more attentive to the progress of China and the world, and to become a more diligent part of the mission to build a community with a shared future for mankind. A new era calls for new action. At China Daily, we are devoted to displaying China in a new era in a truthful, comprehensive, and extensive manner, and being the bridge and bond between China and the rest of the world. We firmly believe China in a new era will bring a new outlook to the world and make greater contribution to the development of human civilization. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cho. Indeed, we young people will bear his words of wisdom in mind. And this is such a meaningful cause that we have here. And of course, we have China Daily and UIBE to thank for that. Now, without further ado, let's turn to the first guest speaker of the evening. Let's first take a look at the clip of this phenomenal man.
I've been coming to China for 28 years, and every time I come to Tiananmen Square, I still have that same sense of awe and power. If China is going backwards or not moving forward as fast as we should, it's because people like you who like China, who could help China, have stayed away. Suddenly I said, "You're right. I'll come back." And I've been coming to China for now almost 30 years, and it's been a great gift to my life to be able to learn so much about China's rich civilization, political theory, the whole development of
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Robert Lawrence Kun. The stage is all yours, Doctor.
各位来宾朋友们，你们好。Vice Minister Goh Wei-min, Editor-in-Chief Zhou Shuchuan. I have to tell you, Mr. Zhou, that I am now have had the privilege of working with China Daily for almost 20 years, and it is a great honor tonight to be with you and everyone here for the inauguration of Vision China. This is China Daily's new era. I have been working with China's leaders for almost 30 years, and sitting in the Great Hall of the People last October at the 19th Party Congress and listening to General Secretary Xi Jinping talk about a new era, I knew instantly that I was listening to something very special, and I was going to dedicate myself after that to understanding deeply what China's new era is and what Xi Jinping thought on China, on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, what that meant. And so we have a new era, Xin Shidai. It's called a new historical starting point. And the starting point, if we want to pick a date, is indeed the 19th Party Congress of the Communist Party of China. Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. And there we are at the conference. So what is the new era? We're going to focus on that tonight to understand what the new era is and how Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, what that means. So let me practice. Xi Jinping, 新时代中国特色社会主义思想. So the first thing I recognize is that the new era sort of comes first because the Xi Jinping thought, Xi Jinping 思想, is for the new era. So in order to understand the thought, we have to understand first the new era, the context in which the thought emerges. So that's the orientation. So as I begin to think about it, I think about this new era, and Xi Jinping thought, what is it? Well, it's going to be directing policy from now on. So it's a policy energizing, policy directing way of thinking. And we're beginning to see some of those things, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. I like to call it a conceptual lens because it's like a pair of glasses that enables us to see the world in a new way. So it's a lens, it's like a telescope, but it's an unusual one. It's a conceptual lens that enables us to see further and what's happening. Now, in terms of a new era, there are many new things. It wouldn't be a new era if it didn't have many new things. But there are also constant things. And I think it's important to up front list what they are because these are elements that are not changing. And these are my ways of thinking. I'm not speaking for anyone officially. I'm an American. I don't represent the American government. I've been coming to China for almost 30 years. I have many friends in China, and I certainly don't represent the Chinese government. I represent my own thinking. And my own thinking is that there are three core interests that remain constant. China's political system, China's economic development, which embeds reform, of course, and national sovereignty, which is territorial integrity. So that's at the 19th Party Congress with one of our friends, Xi Jinping. So we have defined the new era as this conceptual lens in which we're going to look. So what are some of its characteristics? Okay, I start with the concept there are differences. And I think the differences defining the new era are pretty sharp. And that's why I use terms that are different than differences. The terms I like are dislocations, disruptions, unprecedented complex challenges. As I said, I've been coming to China for almost 30 years. I've been analyzing China for maybe 25 years, and so I'm very familiar with the history of problems. And I can tell you that it is true today that the problems and challenges that China faces domestically and internationally are more complex than ever before. And the complexity adds to what this new era is. So I'm going to divide it into two big parts and then a third part, which is important, which you can see. Domestically, now everybody thinks the new era, and I put it first, is slower growth. And that's the prime characteristic of the new era, and that's something that I disagree with. I do not think that slower growth is the prime characteristic of the new era. And there are two reasons for it. Second reason, I'm going to give you the second reason first, is there are a lot of other things that we're going to talk about that characterize the new era. And for slower growth, I just want to throw some very simple numbers at you. So go back to the great days when China was growing remarkably, double-digit growth. And the last time that was occurring, pick 2004, 2005, roughly 10%. It was a little higher than 10% one year, a little lower, but 10% simple. What was China's GDP at that time? Roughly $2 trillion US. Okay, now we're in 2017. You know the growth rate was just announced, 6.9%, a little higher than what was anticipated and projected, so that's good. But what's China's GDP? What's the level? $12 trillion. So to be real simple, 6.9% times $12 trillion, it's a little over 800 million, I think 829 million, something like that, billion. So what you have under China's slow growth is a GDP that's 4 times the gross amount of what it was when China had 10%. This is not higher math. It's just based upon what the base that you're working off is. Now, there are other complexities here, obviously, in terms of growth rate and hiring people. And so growth rate is a legitimate metric. But it is not so critical because the gross increase from over 800 billion to 200 billion is on a population size that's not that much larger. So the gross contribution now is more per capita than it was before. So I only put that on it to show you that growth rate should not be the the sole characteristic of what a new era, the characteristics are. So these are other things that you've seen, you've heard it. Industrial overcapacity, endemic pollution, income disparity is a terrible problem, social imbalances, which is a different issue because you can have income and you can have social imbalances, 2 separate things. Social injustices, rule of law is critical, needs to be increased. Social service demands, interest groups blocking reform. Many leaders have said this for many years. China's biggest problem now is that many interest groups have formed. It's very natural, very sociological, natural development. But it is, in fact, the case. It's great wealth has been created. People have their interests, and well, they should. That's good for society when that happens. But that causes stagnation at times or impossible to make changes. Now, the last one to me is perhaps what I think is the most important, as opposed to slowing growth, which I dealt with, and that's people's rising expectations. A few months before General Secretary Xi Jinping took office, my partner Adam Zhu, who's here tonight, and I had a conversation with a fairly high ranking individual who we were with, and we were just asking whatever we could. We didn't want any confidential information. And he said, the team is ready, the new team is ready. He said, but what we worry about is our people's higher expectations. And that, I think, is one of the critical points of the new era, what people expect, generated by the growth that China has had, the freedom to think and use the social media and the internet. You guys know all of that. Internationally, whole bunch of problems. You know, this is, again, you read the newspaper every day. I don't need to say it. Regional conflicts, sluggish economies, trade protectionism, particularly in the U.S. and Western Europe. We don't know what's going to happen. Have to be ready for it. Volatile markets, ethnic clashes, terrorism, geopolitical rivalries, territorial disputes. You know, these are all mixed together. I put corruption on the categories because, indeed, over the last 5 years, there's been a major effort by President Xi and his team to root out corruption. Remarkable progress, but still a lot to do. But that has been what led to that is also part of what's needed to define the characteristics of the new era. Okay, so during the 19th Party Congress. All right, so we now have characteristics of what this new era looks like. And what we want to do is look at some of the goals of the new era. And the way to do that, the way it's defined, is in terms of time periods. So I put them together because the goals and the time periods really are very close together. And, you know, most of you are very well aware of the 2 centenary goals. Just to repeat it quickly, the first is the first centenary goal is 2021, which is the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China, which was founded in 1921. And the second centenary goal is 2049, which is the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, which was founded in 1949. So that's simple arithmetic. And because those numbers are close to a round number, we sort of round down the 221 to 220, and we round up the 249 to 250. So we have a nice 30-year period, and it's kind of elegant and looks right. These are adjectives. They're not really numbers. They're to define a period of time. So those are our 2 benchmarks. So if we have 2 benchmarks, we have 3 periods of time. The time between now and the first benchmark, the time between the second, the second and the third benchmark. Those are 2. But so let's just go through the first one. So the first one is between now, which is 2018, and 2020, which is the centenary of the party in roughly 2020, 2021. And for this, we can talk about many things. There were two, traditionally, the primary characteristic of the Shaogang Shahui, the moderately prosperous society, was a numerical test, which was double the GDP per capita of, I think, 2010, 2020, little under 10,000 US dollars would be that goal. A few years ago, another test was added to it, which I think is spectacularly important, and I've had the honor to be doing quite a bit of study on it, and that is the promise that all extreme poverty in China will be ended by 2020, by this date. And here's the way of thinking about that you can have a GDP of whatever per capita. You could hit your $10,000, you could be at $20,000 per capita. But if you have Chinese citizens living in abject poverty, you cannot call yourself a moderately prosperous society, Shaogang Shahui. You cannot do it. You have to bring all those people who are in extreme poverty out of that extreme poverty. Now, I'm not addressing the issue of imbalances, because that's a much longer period of time. We're talking about extreme poverty. So that's the first. Those were the two tests. At the Central Economic Work Conference just in December, there was a new innovation, and three big battles were described. So it's the first time. And there are three: controlling financial risk, poverty alleviation, which remained the same, and controlling or bringing down pollution. So those are the big three, and they're targeted for 3 years for that period of time. So that's this first period of time. Now, the innovation at the 19th Party Congress was that this 30-year gap between the first centenary goal, 2020, and the second centenary goal, 2050, approximately, was divided in half. And so there are two 15-year periods that China can judge its success and measure its programs by. And so we have from 2020 to 2035, in which China is basically becoming a fully modernized country, which were basically the same characteristics that used to be applied to 2050, but saying that it will be basically accomplished during the first 15 years, or by the end of the first 15 years, and so that by the second half of that 30-year period, from 2035 to 2050, that China will take these characteristics and sort of fully blossom them, prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful. And at this point, it is recognized that China, as China has been moving to center stage of the world, to quote President Xi, by this time, that process will be fully realized. So those are the time periods. And now is what I want to focus on for the main part of my talk to you tonight are the gut essences of what Xi Jinping thought on socialism, the Chinese characteristics for New Era, what this means in terms of the integration of what we've heard, many different ideas, and how can they be integrated? Because a lot of times you'll read the Xi Jinping thought, etc., and it'll be fairly general. And you'll have, what is in there? What does it really mean? What are the different, how does it work? Well, I'm going to give you my opinion. Again, this is not official. It's just my own, as we say, my own night thoughts, and you can evaluate as you see fit. So I'm dividing it into two parts. One is principles. What are the basic principles of Xi Jinping's thought for the new era? And 5 frameworks, which are 5 very specific things that he has said during this period of time, which I think come together and comprehensively, to use a word that we'll use again, describe it. So 3 primary principles, 5 frameworks. They add up to 8, which is a good number in China, quite accidentally, of course. Okay, so we're going to start with what are the 3 primary principles? And I have 3. First is people orientation. Second is national rejuvenation, which was defined very early in General Secretary Xi's, even before he became president, a few weeks after the 18th Party Congress, when he talked about the Chinese dream being the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people. I define it as these 2 elements together, people orientation and national rejuvenation, together is the exemplification or the description of the Chinese dream. And then I've added a third, which has been continuously strengthened, and that is the leadership of the CPC, the party, not only increasing its leadership, but purifying it in many different ways, not only anti-corruption, but bureaucratic work styles and a whole series of other things. So those are the three primary principles, and we're going to talk a little bit about each one. So in President Xi's New Year's speech, he talked about the most pressing concerns, and if you read these, every one is people orientation, education, employment, income, social security, health care, elderly care, housing, and environmental protection. All people orientation, that's his focus. Now, poverty alleviation, as we said before, is exceedingly important to him. And I have seen with my own eyes and waded through mud with my own feet to see this program. We're working on a special project, which I'm very happy to do. It's not easy work. It's not like elegant like this. But it is really important to really see how anti-poverty is working, this targeted campaign. It's not the purpose of my lecture tonight, so I'm not going to speak too much. But I can say, as much as I thought I knew China, I was overwhelmed by the commitment and the capacity of the anti-poverty campaign. If people here are Chinese and don't know it, it is a revelation. Every single poor family in China, every single one has a file on them. And I saw them in multiple provinces, Guizhou and Hainan and Anhui and Sichuan. And everybody has a file, and they're filled out once a month. Somebody has it. It all goes into Beijing. And in each case, there is a local cadre, an official of the party, often a younger person who has a mid-level career, and he goes to that poor village and spends 2 weeks with every there to really get to know people. I said 2 weeks, right? I lied. I just wanted to see if anybody's awake here. They spend 2 years. They go from their office and job, they spend 2 years in a village responsible for however many, 50, 100, whatever number of the family, they are responsible to bring them out of poverty. It's really remarkable, and as I said, it's worth a whole lecture to understand how that's working. And that only works because President Xi has said, which I thought was a remarkable statement in his speech in Vietnam at ASEAN, that anti-poverty is his most singularly important topic that he deals with. Oh, there are some of the pictures that we're out in the field working. National rejuvenation, I don't need to spend time. It's, strength, confidence, certainly Idailu, the Belt and Road Initiative, which rightly President Xi has called the project of the century. Sometimes Chinese officials get enthusiastic and like to show how much has been accomplished in 2 or 3 years. Sometimes I cringe a little bit at that because if you expect results too quickly for these kind of projects, you could go off the rails. President Xi says it's the project of the century. It could be one of the most important things really in our memory. And now I have to take a minute and tell you a story. So in September of 2016, there was a Belt and Road conference. It was in Xi'an. And I've been honored to be at all 4 major media conferences on Belt and Road, from the first one in 2014, a few months after he announced it in Urumqi, and then Quanzhou, and then it was in Xi'an. Now, and I was asked to chair a session. I'm always happy to do that. But not that day. I was really unhappy to be asked to chair that session. Now, why was I unhappy? Well, that day, at 9 o'clock in the morning in Xi'an, China, was exactly the same time, to the minute, that the first debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump was going to occur in the United States at 9 at night or 8 at night. And I wanted to watch it. I have a family split between them. I don't want to tell you about that. So I really wanted to watch. It's like entertainment, the best possible entertainment for a political junkie like me. And I couldn't, because I had to chair the session. So what I said was, to kind of make myself feel better, and the more I said it, the more I believed it. I opened the session by saying, right now, as I speak, the debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is occurring and wherever it occurred. But I said 100 years from now, people will forget about that debate but they will say they will remember this conference as one part of the Belt and Road, which will have, at that time, looking backwards, an enormous impact on the world. And China moving to the center stage. CPC leadership, you've heard a lot about it, renewing and purifying it, strengthening the role in all facets of society, corporations, universities, and what's to me most interesting, reaching out to the world. You saw a conference in the fall where the CPC brought political parties from other parts of the world to have a dialogue with the CPC. I think this is one of the best developments that I remember. I think it's another way of communicating. Okay, so now we've dealt with the principles. What about the frameworks? And there are 5 frameworks, and they're comprehensive. The first is vision, and that's the 5-in-1 construction that has been talked about: economic, political, cultural, social, and ecological. The second is on governance, and that's the 4 comprehensives. We're going to get into each one of these briefly. The third is on the economy, which is the new concept of development, which used to be called the 5 major concepts of development. And society, the principal contradiction, which was introduced at the 19th Party Congress and how to deal with society. And international, you've heard, a community of shared future. So those 5 things, to me, are the framework of Xi Jinping thought that applies to the new era. So now we're going to talk a little bit about each one. What are the 4 comprehensives? Well, you know that, but I want you to take a little bit of a thought to see how it works. Let's check the time. So the 4, you know: moderately prosperous society, deepening reform, rule of law, and strict discipline of the party. But when I was looking at that, it sounded strange to me because they're all kind of different things. They have a different literary character to them. Moderately prosperous society is a goal. Deepening reform is a means. Rule of law is a principle. And strict discipline of the party is like an action or a state of affairs. So they're all different kinds of things, how they mix together. Moreover, each one has been done in the past. There's nothing new about any of them. Moderately prosperous society, I think it's like 15 years old or more. Reform is obviously 40 years old this year. Rule of law, maybe 20 years. In 1997, I think it began to be talked about. A strict discipline of the party, well, that's been always talked about, even before the founding of the Republic. So what's so new about this? Well, there are 2 new things here. 2 new things that President Xi brings together to make 4 comprehensive represent governance. Number 1 is the use of the word comprehensive, that there's a different way of thinking when you deal with the word comprehensive. Just take one example. Comprehensively having a moderately prosperous society embeds the anti-poverty. If you have moderately prosperous society without comprehensive, you can get away with a good income even if it's not well distributed. The second is that by combining these 4 different things, you have a new way of thinking about the total governance of society. 5 major development concepts: innovation, coordination, green, open, and sharing. Again, any of these could take a full Vision China lecture. So maybe we'll do that in the future. But just briefly on these, innovation is number 1. And that's not an accident. They're not in alphabetical order in Chinese or English, but innovation is number 1. And innovation drives everything. Science and technology for sure, but more than that. But it's innovation in everything that's done. Number 1. Coordination is both geographically, you know, like the Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei region, or the Yangtze River Delta, the Pearl River Delta integration, or it's industrially in how different industries are planned. Very important. Green, for the first time, is at the highest level of national importance. China's always talked about green, but now it's at the highest level. Open. It's been opening for 40 years. Why do you need to be more open? Well, China is opening to the world through Belt and Road, and is opening up more and more of its own industries and own way of thinking. So openness continues to be important. Sharing, the question I ask, why is sharing that so important? Because disparities in income is so important. Why is that last? It's last because it's a natural follower for the others. You couldn't have sharing if you have nothing good to share. So you have to develop the stuff through the first 4. When you have it, you need sharing so that everybody participates. The principal contradiction, which I found fascinating from the 19th Party Congress, Principal contradiction is like a Marxist term that deals with the dialectical materialism, well, what's in society that's causing the most problem and how you can solve it. And during Deng Xiaoping's time, as you see, it's the people's need for things and no productive forces. So you just had to build the economy. Before that, there was a lot better than before that between the class warfare between the proletariat and the bourgeois and all of that. So Deng Xiaoping is a huge change for China, terrific. But now it's different because now more stuff is not that critical. But the key concept is between unbalanced and inadequate development. And here, the people's ever-growing need for a better life. That gets back to expectations. That material and cultural needs have grown, but new things like rule of law and democracy, fairness and justice, security, environment, all of that is important. So the new era contradiction, what that does is it drives towards qualitative growth rather than quantitative growth. And that's why I said that this concept of new era is a policy directing, a policy energizing concept, and the principal contradiction is there as well. Internationally, I used to have eight characteristics. You can read them, starting with a community of shared future, win-win cooperation. You can read the rest, economic globalization, new kind of global governance, new kind of big power relationship, expanding cooperation while managing differences, multilateralism, and people-to-people exchanges. But recently, the community of a shared future has been elevated above a whole series to be the most important and the drivers. That's why that's separate, and so we have the one, and then I have 7 others. There's nothing magic about the numbers. One minor correction, if I can offer my advice to the English translators officially in China, the term that you'll mostly see is a community of shared future for all mankind. And I can tell you that in the U.S., mankind doesn't work anymore. We got to say humankind. And I hope China can catch up with the agenda equality that we have, that we should have. China has always been, in fact, ahead at some point, but now linguistically we want to catch up. So humankind is my recommendation, not mankind. Challenges of the new era. I have a few. I'm going to go through them quickly, but everything is not simple and quick. I have a few minutes, so I'm going to take it. And I just made 7 or so. One is the first question is can the government deliver enough social services and changes to meet the people's rising expectations? Because expectations generally rise faster than you can provide fulfillment of them. Second, financial risk is concerned, so can the debt be sufficiently reduced without seriously impeding economic growth? This is what we talk about very often in more technical lectures and conversations. Same point on pollution. How can you control pollution and still maintain growth? Third is the question of state-owned enterprise reform. Can it be substantially improved with governance and managerial professionalism without giving up state ownership? Some scholars think you can't. Most think you can. That's the government policy. It's an open question. Rural reform, I find one of the most important questions in China. When I first started in China, I had no interest in the rural area, but I've come to appreciate the deep significance of rural reform, rural land reform, the sophistication of collective ownership, which is 46% of the country is under collective ownership of rural groups and townships or counties, etc. And you have collective ownership, and then you have contractual rights, and then you have managerial or operational rights. They're 3 separate things. It's very complicated. Farmers have been taken advantage of. It's a critical issue to continue to follow. Will China open up additional markets? And then the last one is poverty alleviation sustainable? Because we have this enormous effort to bring all the extreme people who are in extreme poverty out of poverty by 2020, and then what? You're going to forget them? Maybe some will fall back. But if they're just over the poverty line, however you define it, they're still very poor, certainly compared to everyone in this audience. So that's still not fair. So what's going to happen after that? The people in terms of relative poverty. There's another scene we had in Guizhou. And that woman, you know, is a no flush toilet, you know, raising a couple chickens. It's quite serious. The last domestic one I have here is on the CPC. CPC has challenges. It's economic reform, guiding social developments, while at the same time improving its transparency, checks and balances, and building institutions within the CPC that are self-regulating. And again, it's an environment that is completely open with social media, so it's a real challenge. Internationally, we also have a number of issues. China balancing sovereignty with territoriality and accusations of China threat or perceptions of China threat, anxieties international. Trade issues, a second, I won't read them all. Belt and road problems, which will occur in the future one way or another. Maybe Chinese assets will be attacked or debts not able to be repaid. How is China going to deal with this on a long-term basis when it becomes on a continuing thing? Backlash against China, China's influence abroad, containment possibilities of different countries reacting to China's growth, China's proactive involvement in the world, I think is terrific, and Vision China is a wonderful exemplification of that. But you know, China, be careful what you wish for, because will China understand what it means to bear some of these burdens and assume responsibilities in an often chaotic world? These are real issues. And how then should China respond to suspicions or anxieties or worries in other countries? You have you know, a situation where if I were here saying that all countries that I visit that I know are very comfortable with China's rise, if I told you that people are very comfortable and happy with it, I'd be telling you a falsehood. Now, I'm going to conclude with a couple of things President Xi Jinping said. First bullet, people orientation, pride in achievements, dangers of complacency, assessing ourselves objectively, and avoiding empty talk. That sounds like President Xi, and he might have said that last week. But when he said that, I was listening firsthand. Adam Jew, my long-term partner who's here, he and I were together with, at that time, Zhejiang Party Secretary Xi Jinping, saying exactly those words in 2006. So when the international media wonders whether President Xi is just making up nice things now because they sound good to mollify people, I can be a one-person witness to say, I heard those words directly in 2006. So if there's one message to characterize the new era, I think it is this, that under the leadership of President Xi Jinping, China set the trajectory in all vital areas of the country's domestic development and international engagement for the next 30-plus years, to mid-century, to 2050.
Thank you very much, Dr. Quinn. Please remain on the stage. That was a very informative speech. I know I at least have learned a great deal from it. Thank you very much. Now, I'm sure our audience are also very amazed by your knowledge and experience. So would you care to take a few questions from the audience?
101.
Great. We have limited time, but this is a very precious opportunity. Anyone? Please.
Good evening, Mr. Kun. It's an honor to listen to your speech. It's very informative. Thank you for your speech. I'm a student from Peking University, and I want to ask you about a question. You might heard a story in China about the blind man touching different parts of elephants. It's about a question of prejudice. And I'm very curious about your first impression when you first arrived in China. And after so many years in China, how did those impressions have evolved? Thank you.
Well, do I have, that's like a course, not a comment. That's like a university course to answer that question, but I'll try. First of all, I should tell you where I first heard that in China, because it was at that same meeting with the then Party Secretary Xi Jinping. I had just finished writing one book about China, and I was preparing a new book about the 30-year reform, and I asked Party Secretary Xi Jinping for advice about how I should think about China. And he used that analogy, and basically it was a mild criticism of me of being only in Beijing or Shanghai or Hangzhou. And he said, you got to get out and see the real China. So I very much appreciated that, and I've tried to live up to that. In terms of a first impression, I'm not sure. Everybody has their own experience, and mine was I was invited because I was a scientist by training. My doctorate is in neuroscience, and I was an investment banker. And I was invited under the aegis of the head of what was then Gujiakuwe, which is the State Science and Technology Commission, Dr. Song Jian, who I look up to as my mentor in China, is a wonderful man and exemplifies all the best about China to me. And I try to see him every visit if he's in Beijing, still very active and very elegant and making brilliant contributions. So my first involvement in China was in early 1989, under the aegis of Dr. Song and the State Science Commission, because I was an investment banker who was trained in science. And I think it's because I wasn't a lawyer. People that were scared of lawyers, then rightly so. And so I was asked to help with new thinking about reform in the science industries. So by meeting the first people I met in China were people, PhDs, from Chinese Academy of Engineering and in science. There was a vibrancy there. I felt at that time there was, there wasn't a jaded naivete. Maybe there was a naivete, but it wasn't the jaded cynicism that I normally would find with American friends. So I saw this can-do everything kind of an attitude. And, there have been ups and downs, but that has been a very lasting feeling. And as I've seen the spirit of the Chinese people and the energy, this can-do spirit has always impressed me.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
Hello, Dr. Kun. I'm Wan Qi with Beijing Foreign Studies University. And I think that your vision of China is largely based on your past experience. So I would like to ask, you have multiple titles now, such as a Chinese studies specialist, a banker, and a scientist. And so for these titles, how did you manage to master so many different fields? And do they have anything in common? Thank you very much.
I'd say the one thing everything I've done in my life has in common, everything I've done reasonably well, that a lot of other things are not so well. But the things that have really worked, I think there's one word to describe the commonality, and that's passion. That whatever I've done, I want to have passion for it. Sometimes there are things I have to do, we all have to do, and for many years I did, that I didn't have the same kind of passion, but I had to do it. But the things that you mentioned in terms of business and investment banking, certainly science, I do a lot of science and philosophy work in the United States, and everything I've appreciated about China has to do with a passion. So the first word is passion. The second, to expand that a bit, is a passion to learn. I'm not here to teach. I love to learn. Teaching bores me. Learning excites me. So the more I can learn, when I write a new book, it's something I want to learn about. And so I use that vehicle to learn. And so passion about learning is the common denominator. And China has given me, as you saw in the clip, a hugely enriched life because of everything I've learned here.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Yes, over there, please.
Hello, sir. It's good to meet you tonight. I'm a student from Nankai University, Binghai College. And my question is, I know that you are an expert in realms from science, culture, economy to politics. So in your perspective, in your opinion, in which areas could China enhance its image to make the world know us in a more objective and unbiased way? And what kind of image should China establish now? Thank you.
Well, obviously, this is something I have thought very deeply about. I think the event we're at tonight, to the creativity of Editor-in-Chief Zhou in China Daily, is a wonderful expression where we can have open dialogue, and the whole vision, not just tonight, but the whole vision, where you can have open and honest debate. You saw that on the screen. Very interaction. China is now, rightly so, much more confident in in everything that China has achieved, its system, its economic development, its culture, everything. So there needs to be more engagement, more debate. There's not a magic bullet. And oftentimes you can spend a lot of money and it can be counterproductive. But the more you can have an honest discourse and not so much to think, what can I do to portray what I know, but rather don't think about portraying, just tell the truth. You don't have to think about how to dress it up. There were times in the past in China where you had to think how to dress it up, and normally unsuccessfully because you couldn't dress it up. You don't have to do that anymore. China is remarkable in so many respects, so just talk naturally and have open debate, open discussion. And I know this forum will be a great expression of that.
That's very wise. Thank you. All right, one last chance. Yes, please.
My name is Hopola Molale. I'm from the Republic of South Africa. I am doing my Master's in Business Administration with the host, UIB. I must say I'm a huge fan and follower and a reader of your columns in in China Daily, and
I work hard on them. That's good to hear. I work really hard on them.
Yeah.
I have tough editors.
South China Morning Post,
Okay.
and also your book, The Mystery of Existence. It's
Oh, wow.
Nice read.
Wow, that's my science and philosophy book.
Thank you.
I'm impressed that you know that.
Thank you.
That's one of my secrets. Okay.
Thank you, sir. No, I have one direct question for you, sir. My question is, as a renowned commentator and scientist and a public intellectual, what is the toughest question you have encountered in all the platforms that you have engaged in, and how did you best answer it?
Well, I love answering questions about China, and I often do BBC and CNN, and I can tell you, in dozens of what I've done, I've never once gotten questions in advance. That's not the way the system. So I have to be prepared. It's live worldwide, and I'm now nervous. I'm still nervous, but I'm nervous. Is the camera going to work? Is my hair messed up? I'm not worried about the question. It doesn't matter any question, because I have the confidence in having the personal experience that I can talk from in China. So there's no question about China that today is the toughest. I'd say going back 5 or 6 years, maybe, I told one person, a friend of mine, that I can answer every question about China, but I can't explain why when, at that time, Kim Jong-il came to China, he was so feted with senior leaders. I've come to be able to explain fairly in depth, and I've done recently on BBC, why China's long-term policy about North Korea. Doesn't mean I have to agree with everything, but I can explain it. So right now, there's no question that I would feel uncomfortable with. That's the toughest question, although North Korea issues going back a few years, that would have been the one at that time.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please give another round of applause to Dr. Kun. Thank you very much. All right, next up we have Mr. Andrew Moody, who has written as many great pieces as the and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Andrew Moody. Enjoy the stage.
Thank you. Quite an introduction. It's good to be able to address you all at this inaugural Vision China event. One of my jobs at China Daily is to connect with those who write and express views about China from abroad and the world. So I want to speak to you tonight about the reaction of sinologists and other experts about China's new era. I particularly want to include the views of those from the developing world, especially Africa, because their perspective is perhaps the most fundamental to all of this. I was very fortunate to actually be in the Great Hall of the People when President Xi Jinping made his report to the 19th CPC National Congress in October. I was reporting on the event for one of 3 cover stories I did for China Daily's overseas editions on the Congress meeting, the covers of which are shown here behind me. There was a sense or a buzz in the Great Hall of having witnessed something historic, aside from the extraordinary length of Xi's speech itself, which, as you know, was nearly 3.5 hours. So what did this new era mean? The immediate reaction to Xi's report was that China's new era was a new and confident China striding forward into a world that it itself would play a large part in shaping. In the 40 years after reform and opening up, from the late 1970s onwards, China was largely in the catch-up phase. The focus was on the economy, and China was content to operate in a Western global order. China, however, was now moving onto the next stage in its development, which would play a more central role. This was not intended in any way as a threat to the West. It was just a statement of reality. China is the world's second largest economy, the world's largest manufacturer and exporter. The sheer numbers of China's vast and fast-growing middle class is evident wherever you go in the world. Chinese tourists are everywhere, and Chinese students provide vital income for universities in the US, the UK, or elsewhere. China, too, now has its own major, truly global initiative in Belt and Road. China's very size and status meant there has to be some sort of change. One of the first experts I spoke to after the report was delivered was Martin Jakes, the British author and academic who comes very much from the Marxist tradition in terms of his thinking. I happened to be at the launch of his now famous book, When China Rules the World, at the Hay Book Festival in Wales in 2009. The book had been described as silly by none other than Chris Patten, the former governor of Hong Kong. After Xi's report, the book, however, seemed immediately prescient and a vindication of Jakes' ideas. This was not necessarily because China was about to take over the world anytime soon, but because Xi's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era was a solid defense of China's system. Jakes said, and I quote, "Xi wanted to underscore the fact that the Chinese economy is not gravitating toward capitalism. It is not going to end up as a Western-style economy or a Western-style polity. It is going to remain profoundly different. And in that sense, it remains firmly in a socialist rather than a capitalist tradition." There was other reaction. Peter Frankopan, professor of global history at Oxford University, said Xi had managed to present a unified global vision. Frankopan, for those who don't know, is also the author of the excellent best-selling book, The Silk Road, The New History of the World, and is one who certainly sees the significance of China's Belt and Road Initiative. He said, and I quote again, "When you are in Beijing, the old world, represented by the United States and Britain in particular, looks highly divided. There are conflicting views of what the direction of travel should be. What Xi has been very careful to do over the last few years is set out a grand vision, and it is now all about getting behind that vision and putting the shoulder to the grindstone to make sure it is deliverable." Rana Mitter, director of the University of Oxford China Centre, said that what Xi was doing was putting China front and centre in world affairs. He added a note of caution, however, and said that this was not going to be straightforward for China, since what went with it would be a new series of responsibilities, such as opening up its market and taking positions on local and global security, as well as climate change. One of the interesting parts of Xi's report was the long-term goals. As Xi said in his report, we must work with resolve and tenacity and write a brilliant chapter on our new journey to socialist modernization. In his speech, Xi set a new staging post target for China's development. This will be 2035. By 2035, China has set itself the aim to become a global leader in innovation, have more equal rights for citizens, see improvements in the rule of law, have increased soft power, better public services, and there's also this goal of creating what Xi called a beautiful China relating to the environment, but also with a broader meaning with historical and cultural connotations. The 2049 target for China's modernization to be complete in time for the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. This we already had. By then, China is aiming to become a global leader in terms of national strength and international influence. There will be common prosperity for everyone, and Chinese people will enjoy safer and healthier lives. The most immediate target, though, is 2020, the aim to double China's 2010 GDP per capita within what is now just 2 years. By doing so, China will become a moderately well-off society and effectively break out of the middle-income trap in time for the 100th anniversary of the founding of the CPC in 2021. With China reporting 6.9% growth for 2017 last week, the first year it has accelerated since 2010, this now looks comfortably achievable, although that wasn't always the case. One thing a number of people have observed about the longer-term target is there are no numbers attached. What they have taken from that is that China in future is to focus on the quality rather than the quantity of its growth. Zhu Ning, ocean-wide professor of finance at Tsinghua University, believes moving away from growth targets is actually setting out a new vision for development and thinks that as a result, that China will grow more sustainably in the long term. New Era is also very much about poverty reduction. Xi, in his report, stressed the target of eliminating extreme rural poverty in China by 2020. This was also emphasized at an Africa-China high-level dialogue and think tank forum I attended in Addis Ababa in June last year, where there's a lot of interest in Xi's book, Up and Out of Poverty. The book records the time that Xi was party chief of Ningde prefecture of Fujian province in the late 1980s and his efforts to tackle poverty then. One of the defining aspects of Xi's approach to reducing poverty is to shake off what he describes as a poverty mentality, to instill in people a self-belief, as well as putting the right policies in place. He is also against grandiose projects or initiatives which might not deliver any real benefits. This brings us to an important aspect of China's new direction. To what extent is China's new era relevant to the rest of the world? Jakes, the British author and academic, says China, although with more than a foot in the developed world, is now without question the leader of the developing world, and as such is seen as a role model. He says this is more difficult for the developed world. The view there has been that China is not like us and is therefore not going to make it. I think it's important to make a distinction here, however, between a role model and an economic model. I spoke to a number of African journalists at the Congress meeting, and they had a range of views on this. Bukola Jasmine Augustina, chief correspondent of Leadership, a Nigerian newspaper, said it was important that China wasn't forcing its own particular model of development in Africa, and in Nigeria's case, it was better it found its own model of development and did not just copy either Asian or Western models. Yazina Faneka-April, a research specialist at the Africa Institute of South Africa, says the difficulty for Africa is that China's model depends on having a strong state. Africa, as a continent, is host to many weak states, she says, which would find it difficult to replicate. There are exceptions, however. For Ethiopia, whose ruling party has strong links with the CPC, China's model of development is already something of a blueprint. If you travel just 30 miles outside of Addis Ababa, you arrive at the Eastern Industrial Park, home to Huajian, the Chinese shoemaker, and an industrial zone which looks like a piece of China transplanted to the African continent. Getachew Yalo, an Ethiopian journalist at the Congress, said that Ethiopia had managed to deliver some 23 million people out of poverty in 2 decades by following China's approach. It had carried out agricultural reform and built a manufacturing base, something that is right out of the Reform and Opening Up copybook. 3 months on from the report and the launch of New Era, the ideas still resonate. Earlier this month, I conducted a series of interviews in London, including one with former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He was, of course, in office when Hong Kong was returned to China in 1997. He's been a regular visitor to China ever since and has frequently made the point that many in the West simply don't get China. He said Xi's report was interesting from a number of important angles, but it indicated more than anything that China now had the ambition to go on to the next stage where it would have big significance in the world. The rise of China, he says, is the biggest single geopolitical change of the 21st century. There is virtually no problem in the world that can be resolved without China. We are left with a question as to how actually historic could New Era prove to be. Xi, in his report, made many historical references. He talked of China's 5,000 years of civilization and about how China was less than 2 centuries ago one of the world's greatest ever powers. Then, however, came the Opium Wars and China's century of humiliation before Mao reasserted China's national pride in 1949. One of the boldest interpretations of New Era is whether it challenges existing concepts of modernity itself. In the West, we are all very used to the idea that Western modernity is the finished product and the only type of modernity available. Take it or leave it. But when you think about Western modernity as we know it now, it perhaps dates back to the Enlightenment that spread through the Europe of the early 18th century. These ideas were embodied in the industrial revolutions that began in Britain and then through Europe to the United States. In the context of Chinese history, this is not a long time. One of Jake's contentions is that Western modernity is not the eternal concept we assume in the West, and far from a universal model. In his view, New Era is the beginning of a representation of Chinese modernity and the benefits that it can bring. But this is perhaps too big a question for now. In conclusion, some parts of New Era are yet to be defined, yet it is about China entering the next stage of its domestic development and taking a more central role on the world stage. What we know from Xi's report is that New Era as a concept is intended from the outset to be significant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moody. Thank you for sharing with us the significance of China entering the new era, as well as what you've heard from the international community in response to this. Now, does anyone in the audience have any questions for Mr. Moody? Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. It's a fantastic speech you have done. And I'm Daria. I come from Communication University of China. It's a little bit far away from here. I'm interested in one concept you mentioned, modernity. It's a topic that we often discuss in sociology. It's indeed hard to say if modernity has a certain mode. But what's the most important feature of modernity in your opinion? And what impresses you most about China's modernization? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a long time since I studied sociology. Sociology, I suppose, is interested in post-traditional societies, and modernity is a starting point in post-traditional societies. What I've been talking about here, though, is Martin Jakes' ideas as a counterpoint, maybe to Francis Fukuyama's sort of the end of history, the end of the Cold War. Then Fukuyama's argument is we're at the end of history. The Western liberal order has been established. That is the system that's now going to be adopted by everyone. And Martin Jakes is, to some extent, a counterpoint to that. And what was interesting about the report speech was that everybody sort of all the commentary in The Economist, other publications, really highlighted the fact that Xi's speech was actually a statement that other systems exist, and the Chinese system was here to stay and wasn't going to move on to some other form of system. In terms of modernity generally, though, I mean that's political system modernity. You've got you ask the question, what will the world look like with China being a bigger player? Will the world be sort of full of tea houses and noodle bars and not KFC and McDonald's? Well, I mean that's one extreme version, but I mean with Tencent, Alibaba becoming major companies, you can see the beginnings of Chinese influence on the rest of the world. But I was pretty concerned. I went to the Wuzhen World Internet Conference in December, and you saw very clearly then what they call the fourth industrial revolution, sort of how near that could be, and in sort of 20, 30 years' time, societies as a whole, whether within China's system or Western liberal democracies, have got to face this big issue of how to deal with sort of the world of work and whether we're going to have jobs in the age of robots and that type of thing. So modernity has many, many aspects.
Thank you. Yeah, that's quite true. It does. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, over there, please.
I'm Ni Fei from Peking University. It's a pleasure to hear such a wonderful speech. I want to ask, as you mentioned in your speech, China's modernity is different from Western modernity, and China's development is not following the same path as most Asian and Western countries. China's new concept of China's new era and the Belt and the Road Initiative is all new to the world. But sometimes when new deals arises, people may have doubtful or negative attitudes. How do you overcome the challenges of showing the real China to the world, especially to those who have biases or stereotypes against China? Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a difficult question. I mean, and it's a long-term thing. I think you can't change this overnight. There are negative perceptions about China, but it's about engagement. If China becomes much bigger than it is now, has much more interaction with the rest of the world, then people will see China as it actually really is. I mean, one of the 2035 objectives is better increased soft power, and organizations like I work for, China Daily, can actually sort of play a role in improving sort of China's soft power. But I do think this is a long-term process, and China doesn't need to be sensitive to criticism. It just, I mean, America gets criticized all the time, so China doesn't have to be sensitive to criticism. It can just do what it does and engage with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Any more questions? Oh, over there, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. And I'm a student from the University of Science and Technology, Beijing. Tonight, our theme is vision. And we've been talking about China's future and the world's future. May I ask you a question about yourself? Well, what role do you envision yourself to play in this process? And where do you envision yourself to be when the next CPC National Congress is held? Thank you.
That's like one of those job questions. Where are you going to be in the next 5 years? Yeah. Somewhat pretentiously, because of what I did before, I tend to view my career in UK parliamentary cycles, and with Theresa May calling a general election last year, the China's political cycle and the UK political cycle are now they're now in sync. The UK general election having to be by July 2022, and the 20th CPC in the autumn. But maybe I will be sort of reporting on the Congress sort of in 2022. But I certainly intend to carry on working and writing about China. It's a fascinating story and it's something I really enjoy doing.
That's really good to hear. We look forward to more wonderful pieces from you. Again, Andrew Moody, ladies and gentlemen, please give him a round of applause. Thank you very much. All right, and now for our final speaker of the evening, or what we'd like to call our woman of the hour, Ms. Liu Xing. Here is her clip. Prepare to be amazed.
I love this. I love this job. And I think this is nationalistic to ideological. I don't agree. Who says the United States can go away from this? They have a historic and present responsibility because the United States is among the top 3 polluters. So they cannot just simply walk away from this. When they find it unstoppable, they chase the story that's not there. What an ironical story indeed. This is Liu Xin getting to the point.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Ms. Liu Xin, welcome.
I was totally oversold. Oh my goodness, such high expectations. I'll be shivering with nervousness. But anyway, I am here. I have to answer the call. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Since I joined CCTV 20 years ago, I have been doing one thing. Actually, since I entered Nanjing University to study English in 1993, I have set the goal for myself to be a bridge between China and the rest of the world. And for the past 20 years after I joined CCTV, I've been doing just that. Now, China has entered a new era. What does this mean to me? Now, a host of an opinion show on CGTN, formerly known as CCTV News or CCTV International or CCTV 9, in all, the international TV of CCTV. Before I give you my answers, I would like to share with you a personal story about my serendipity with China Daily. In 1995, I won the first ever national English public speaking competition organized by China Daily, the first of its kind in China. I won, and then I represented China to participate in the international public speaking competition. I won again, and there I was being received by Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, as part of the honor. And thank you, Lao Huangli. Anyway, he asked me jokingly, "So you also speak Chinese?" That was quite funny. Anyway, my topic 20 years ago was about choice, and you know, China was undergoing reform and opening up for about 15 years. So we Chinese, for the very first time in history, had the abundance of choice in our daily lives. What did choice mean to me back then as a college student? And I divided my answers in 3 parts: opportunities, challenges, and responsibilities. 20 years later, or over 20 years later, I'm standing on the same stage facing a very similar question. What a pleasure and what a coincidence. And I think it is only fitting that I give the answers in a similar structure. But this time, I'm going to talk about challenges first, then the opportunities, and finally my responsibilities as I become more confident of who I am and how the future will be looking like. So, let's go. China into a new era, challenges. China enters the new era with greater confidence, but with a certain image deficit and trust deficit. I call it this way. Because of the ideological differences between China and the West, China has always been the subject or target of Western media criticism or scrutiny, sometimes downright bashing based on falsehoods. For instance, this is the kind of political cartoon you'll be reading on the Western press about China's ambition, world's #1, crushing the US along the way. That was drawn in December 2014. And now China has defied all kinds of predictions of a, I should go back, yeah. Now that China has defied all kinds of predictions of a regime collapse or economic hard landing, Western observers and commentators are at a loss of words to explain the China phenomenon, the one-party dictatorship, how come it can make it? And the resulting feeling among the general public in the West, I describe it like this, could be a superiority complex mixed with bewilderment, possibly iced with envy and jealousy. On the other hand, China has also been a scapegoat for some domestic policy failures in Western countries. In the US, for instance, the loss of jobs has been blamed squarely on Chinese competition in the mainstream US media. Again, a Western political cartoon, China currency, so have you moved it, will ya? Politicians then would put unfair pressure on China to score domestic political gains, reinforcing the general public's skepticism and misunderstanding about China. By the way, that picture reminded me of a sentence in Kung Fu Panda. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? That famous line was when the jaguar was telling the panda, "What can you do? Sit on me?" Did it ring a tone? Anyway, so that was the kind of scapegoating China had to suffer. As a result, we're looking at the kind of trust deficit and image deficit in the Western general public. A survey conducted by the Committee of 100 last year, for instance, found that the majority of Americans responding to that survey, 73%, think that China's growing military power, and 63% of the respondents think that China's growing economic power is a potential to a serious threat. Last October, in the Asia-Pacific region, the picture is also mixed. Last October, right before the 19th National Congress of the CPC, the Pew Research Center, a leading US survey company, did a survey to find out about how China was viewed in the eyes of 8 Asia-Pacific countries. And the survey found little consensus as to whether or not China's economic growth was more of a good thing or a bad thing for their country. Most people in that region thought that China's growing military power was worrying, and many in the region thought that China's growing power and influence in the Asia-Pacific was a key concern, greater than their concern about the United States. But the picture is not all doom and gloom. As we say in Chinese, in every crisis we see an opportunity. Let's look at the opportunities we're faced with in the international media in the near future. Now, the world's impression, as I said, about China, although mixed in some parts, in some regions, generally have been positive. Let's look at a survey carried out jointly by the China Foreign Languages Publishing Administration and the global research firm Cantor, Millward Brown, and Lightspeed. What they found out after talking to people aged 18 to 65 in 20 countries is that, in general, people have a positive view about China. The score is 6.22 out of a total of 10. 及格了, but still in the positive territory. And the survey also shows that China's image in developing countries' people's eyes is much better than in the eyes of people in developed countries. There you have the comparison. In developing countries, 6.9, and in developed countries, 5.6. So there's a difference there. And the trend has actually been reinforced over the past year. According to a Gallup poll released last Thursday, we all know this company, very famous, the world's population more approval of China's leadership than the leadership of the United States in 2017. And we can look at the figure. The median approval of the US's leadership has dropped to 30%, whereas their approval of China's leadership has increased to 31%. The difference is really small, by the way, but still, we are ahead than the United States, which is good news. So looking at the numbers, I wonder why China has been able to win more hearts in the eyes of the world's people, especially in developing countries. President Xi Jinping gave his answers in his research to the 19th National Congress of the CPC. He said, China's transformation offers a new option for other countries and nations who want to speed up their development while preserving their independence. And it offers Chinese wisdom and a Chinese approach to solving the problems facing mankind. I think that is a very significant paragraph. For decades, the world's developing countries had very limited choice when it comes to their development path. Economically, they were given that neoliberalist prescription. You have to take it, it's good for you, but in the end, they were exposing themselves, they were opening up their domestic market and industries without prudence, exposing themselves to financial crisis or economic crisis before they could build up a solid economic foundation. Outside aid and assistance often came slowly with low efficiency and with many strings attached. Politically, most countries had to take side in order to get their protection or safety. The world was either friends or foes. And when the Cold War ended, the Cold War mentality stayed on. Nowadays, still, countries, developed ones and developing ones, have to cede part of their sovereignty for their safety. In international affairs, we're also seeing a gloomy picture. One or two countries can dictate how things are run. The fundamental values and principles that have been enshrined in the UN Charter have been ignored, together with for instance, the ultimate prudence against the use of force, the importance of peaceful solutions to the issues we're faced with, the importance of cooperation, together with solidarity and unity. Since the Trump administration came into power last year, the trend has become even more worrisome. National interests have been put to a level higher than our joint commitment to this world and to, I'm not going to say mankind, I'm going to say humankind. I learned my lesson. And major countries' responsibilities to the world is being turned into carefully calculated bargaining chips. I don't like that. So the world is being pulled into two different directions. One is based on ideology and conflict-driven. The other is inspired by the inspiration for common prosperity and cooperation-driven. I think the world's people are making up their mind about where they want to go. That is the historic responsibility we are faced with in this new day and age. And this is, in my eyes, the soul of CGTN in this new era. Our motto, see the difference, is just right to the point. So while China has a great story to tell, the media marketplace is also shifting in profound ways. And here lies the second opportunity I want to talk about. Traditionally, people have relied on TV, relied on a few Western correspondents or commentators, experts on information and opinions about China. But now it doesn't have to be like that. We are here. CGTN is there. China Daily is there. So people have a lot more information. According to some statistics, over the past year, the international recognition of the brand of CGTN has increased from 13% to 30%. The 12.8% of international viewers, when they want to find out about a China-related story, they were tuned to us, an increase of 4%. Also in some parts of the world, for instance in France, in the Philippines, and in 5 African countries, our viewership has jumped by 3/4, extremely considerable. And on the new media platform, the growth has been exponential. Within 1 year, the total number of followers of CGTN on all international platforms and domestic platforms totaled over 95 million. CGTN is now the world's #1 news account on Facebook. And it's the same picture across the board for Chinese media, for Chinese international media. So indeed, by the way, we have a lot of people watching us on their mobile devices, real-time, unedited. This was just not possible a couple of years ago. So indeed, another great opportunity for all of us here. However, let's not forget our international counterparts are also vying for greater influence. They're also doing the same thing, and the fight for the international microphone is set to become uglier. So in this day and age, how can we in the international media of China make a real impact? What is my responsibility? There you go, 95 million. Yes, thumbs up to ourselves. Responsibilities. Okay, the point. We are a weeknight opinion show. On average, during each episode, we'll talk about 2 topics. We'll invite 2 to 3 guests to come and express their opinions and have a debate or agree with each other. And they come from different parts of China and different parts of the world. Our topics are indeed wide-ranging, from hip-hop music to blockchain, from environmental protection to nuclear non-proliferation, you name it. It's like a fast food restaurant, I would say. Within less than 15 minutes, I have to bring out enticing dishes for the audience, for them to consume, before we move on to the next course. So there you go. That's how I see myself sometimes. Right. So there are different ways to do it. You can throw some raw ingredients together, heat it up in the microwave oven, and then just serve it carelessly. Or you can think about it. Design the recipe, design the menu, yes. Find the most original and fresh ingredients. Cook in a way to bring out the most natural flavor and present with warmth and a touch of style. I choose the second approach. It sounds simple, but it's not easy because every step in that process counts. First, you have to find facts. And fact-finding is essential for us because facts is what opinions are based upon. If you get the facts wrong or incomplete, you risk forming the wrong conclusion. A good example was this piece of video. I think many of you have watched this. This went viral on the social media, even many mainstream international media aired it. It's about US President Donald Trump feeding the fish. The idea was people were laughing at him for not respecting local customs or jeopardizing the fish's life because he, after a few spoonfuls, he just dumped the whole bowl of fish feed into the pond. People say, look, you're trying to kill the fish because the fish will keep eating. However, if you take the entire piece of video, you would see that he was simply following the example of his host, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, because Abe did that first. And then he did that. But people purposely cut out the first part and try to make fun of him. A lot of people fell for the trap. It's very, very slippery ground. Secondly, how do you organize the discussion so that people can most easily follow you? How do you lay the groundwork? Where do you start? Where do you finish? How do you give every How do you give every guest an equal amount of time to speak with or not? I agree with what they say. This is the usual lineup of an average discussion. There, nobody is speaking. Yeah, we have absolute equality and tranquility there. But on a daily basis, you have to give everybody a fair amount of the talk. And let me tell you, they're live. You know, nobody tells them what to say. So they come and say, I don't agree with what China is doing, and you have to let them finish their sentence. And you have to do that if you call yourself an international media, if you want to be credible. Finally, there are the technical aspects, the camera work, the lighting, the makeup, the wardrobe. Behind every single aspect, real work has to go in to really make the show a professional production. Some of you might say professionalism is important, but is that going to be enough to give China a stronger voice? What about the bias that China has been suffering? Is this weapon powerful enough? Well, I understand the desire to be more assertive, and I want to be assertive sometimes when I'm supported by facts. But I believe we always face the danger of putting our feelings in front of our reason, putting our opinions in front of the facts, while China is offering the world a new option, a new approach, or the Chinese wisdom. Let's not forget, it is something that is unprecedented in human history. China has never done it. The world has never seen it. It is likely that we might have detours, we might make mistakes, we might bump into problems. And it's natural that the world is going to misunderstand us, is going to be critical of us, is going to be afraid of us. Our responsibility is not to oversell the China wisdom, but to document and explain the journey of China's rise. Let history be our judges. President Xi Jinping said, not angling, that is our team, by the way. President Xi Jinping said, and I love this sentence, not angling for compliments. I would be content if my integrity fills the universe. While the Chinese people are working hard to make China a stronger country and help building a community of common future for humankind, my job is to tell China as it is, not more, not less, one topic at a time, one show at a time. It is not only a challenge, but also a pleasure, as it has been speaking with you about it today. As I always wrap up, at the end of my show, follow me on Facebook or Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Today I'm adding one. Follow me on Weibo using Liu Xin CGTN. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Liu. You've certainly given us much food for thought. And I've personally picked up some wardrobe tips from you. Pink and black do go together.
Thank you.
And might I add, I'm actually very proud to be able to say this right in front of the woman herself. We actually have something in common.
Which is?
I also took part in the China Daily 21st Century Cup competition.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Although I, not like you, I didn't go all the way to winning world championship, but I would say that all of us who got the chance to go to London to attend the international event, we were the lucky ones because...
You should owe it to China Daily.
Yes, of course, to China Daily. Thank you, China Daily, for giving us the experience, that immense sense of responsibility and desire, like you said, to tell China's story, the real one, the full version to the world. And that was a very powerful experience for me. And now, again, let's go to the audience, a Q&A session.
Okay, I see a boy there.
I actually see one over there who's more than eager, jumping up and down almost.
Well, you are the second one then.
Please.
Don't ask me difficult questions.
I think it is not difficult. Hello, I'm Wang Qiyao, a student from Peking University, and I'm really inspired by your speech, and I would like to ask you a question, a very easy question. Well, I know that you won lots of English public speaking contests.
Just two.
Yeah, when you were still a college student. And those experiences really contributed to your future like news and journalism industry. Well, so what is your advice for us? I mean, like me, we are also enthusiastic about debating and public speaking. So what is your advice for us to turn our passion and skills into a real career life? Thank you.
Thank you. I actually get asked that question quite often, and I always feel a little bit sorry that I can't give them an easier answer, because it is not easy. To be able to debate in English, to be able to even speak English is not easy. It's a lot of work. So I don't want to give people the impression that, you know, there's some kind of a magic formula where you have to work really hard to build the solid foundation. And that's, if I can give one piece of advice, that's where you should start. And by that I mean intonation and pronunciation. A lot of people do not see how important that is. They think they want to go on to the more important level of content, of debating skills, but they can speak a series of very complicated sentences without the audience understanding a word. Why? Because they got the foundations wrong, the intonation and the pronunciations wrong. And basically, that's what I was talking about in my speech, the professionalism. You have to start from the basics. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, just now I saw a hand going up there.
What about that boy?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. You're a very good advertiser for your program.
Well, that's what I do. That's how I tell the China story.
Yes, you do serve as the great bridge, as a communicator between China and the Western world. And today I'm going to ask you a question concerning the international communication. Because President Xi has called for many times we should make many efforts in soft power building, especially international soft power communication. So, and he has put forward some very practical principle as to tell the world audience in authentic, comprehensive, and multidimensional manner. So my question is, from your perspective as a professional journalist and TV host, so what do you think of this major transformation for China's mainstream media in reporting China to the outside world? And what approaches can we take to make this strategic goal more recognizable in the Western world? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. It's a very important question. Basically, that's what we try to do every day. Basically, how do you tell the China story more effectively, right? In this day and age, when you have the new media, you know the numbers. If people are switching off, if people are not following you, you know you're not doing well. If you think you're doing well, you have to use numbers to show them. So that's a really challenging fact. I think we need to jump on the wagon of the new technology, you know, be where the new technology is going. For instance, when you have the AI simultaneous translation, I think it's fantastic. When you are live streaming this to the audience, to the outside world, you know, it's fantastic. But the content is very important. I think China, if we are more confident, we can really be more sincere, be more at ease with our problems, with our achievements as well. So let's have a sincere conversation, not shy away from the problems we're faced with. That's why I say let's tell the China story as it is. China story is not 100% about achievements. It's you know, every day we see mixed news. We have mixed feelings. So let's be factual, let's be sincere, and let people decide whether they want to watch us or not. And this is going to take time, but I think if we follow the right philosophy, the right steps, we are going to make it. Thank you.
We have very limited time.
Yeah,
a quick one maybe.
I would add something. Tonight I'm coming here for you, and I always see your programs on TV screen or through web videos. And today I see the real charming lady here.
Okay, are you happy? Are you happy?
Yes, very excited.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
It's always good.
Okay, let's go to the next question.
Over there, please. I think that's another one of your fans.
Good, she's Lin. Mrs. Liu, sorry. I'm also your fan. I come from China University of Political Science and Law. My name is Tiffany, and my Chinese name is Wang Tiantian. Actually, I want to ask a question because I just heard from your speech you mentioned that younger foreign respondents tend to have more positive views about China. You know, in our university, there are a lot of foreigner students, and they are witnessing and experiencing the new era of China get a chance to them. And if you are invited to give them a piece of advice, what would that be? Thank you.
A piece of advice for foreign people in China, foreign young people in China? I think they're already doing the right thing by being in China, right, at this particular moment.
Very, very smart.
Yeah, I think they are. The fact that they come here because they believe in this place and they want to find out about it. What else can you ask that?
Yeah, indeed. It's very true.
Sorry, it's a short answer.
No, but, you know, a lot of times it's the shortest answers that are the wisest.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have limited time, so one last question. I'm sorry, I know you guys have a lot of questions. Yes, I see your hand all the way going here. Yes, please.
Hello, Ms. Liu Xin. I'm Li Haipei from Beijing Forestry University. I very much enjoy your speech, and actually I've been a big fan of you since I was a little girl. So, as an international journalist, you may need to explain concepts like the 19th CPC National Congress and China entering a new era to foreign viewers. I think it might be difficult compared with talking to Chinese viewers. So what methods do you use to better present the Chinese ideas and stories to foreigners? Thank you.
I don't like the word present, actually, because that means you know what you're going to talk about and you put it in front of them, take it or leave it. I would like to say we choose a topic which we think might be interesting, might be informative to them, and we do the discussion. I'm not worried about how it's going to look like, what's going to be the conclusion. Let's have a genuine and high-quality discussion, and that is it. So first of all, that is the point I want to make. And then you're talking about what is the difference between, well, when you're talking to an international audience, they don't have the context, right, of in the minds of a domestic audience. You have to explain a lot of basic things, and sometimes it's the explaining that makes a difference, because then they can really understand you. Otherwise, you just go on about, you know, very complicated things, and people will not be able to follow you. Sometimes the important thing is to keep your audience in your mind. Always think what they might need, how their experience might be. There is a golden sentence in the media, in the TV, which is, never leave your audience scratching their heads. Do you get it? So never talk about something without laying the groundwork that they cannot follow. So when you have that in your mind, I think slowly you'll get there. Slowly you'll get there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please remain on the stage for just a little longer. But with this, we come to the end of today's live broadcast. So thank you for all those who tuned in. 在这里我们